Hello again, this is another board game review, one of my world famous board game reviews I haven't done for quite some time. I spoke about in my This Week video that I'd recently bought Pandemic Legacy, just come out, so today I'm reviewing Pandemic. Yes, I have the old version of Pandemic. I know I haven't bothered to get the new one, partly because I have the On the Brink expansion. I've had Pandemic for quite a long time. I have the On the Brink expansion, and they're not compatible, so I'd have to buy the new Pandemic and the new On the Brink expansion, and that's just kind of bugged me a little bit. I probably would eventually upgrade to the new design, um, but I don't really see the need at the moment. I know there's a few more expansions that have come out that are meant to be really cool. I haven't yet played them, but no, this the old version just works fine for me at the moment. I just didn't see the need. If someone wants to buy the old version off me, and then I can buy the new one, then that's fine. But I haven't yet explored that. First, I just want to say that Pandemic is a game I really, really like. I don't get to play it as much as I want to, because I often find it quite hard to get to the table. People often aren't that turned on by it. It's a little, I guess it's a little bit dry, but it's very, I don't know. It's one of the best cooperative games I think I've ever played, and it just kind of entails a lot of discussion. It really gets you working together. Whereas a lot of co-op games suffer a bit from leader bashing and a bit from just sort of muddled, or you're isolated from the group maybe. I mean, I love Shadows of a Camelot, but it doesn't feel like you're working as a team. It just feels like, what can I do? Because there's that traitor element. And I love the traitor element, don't get me wrong. I absolutely love that, but Pandemic is the one co-op game I've played where it really feels like you have to work together. There's always a big discussion going on, trying to figure out everyone's best moves. It's partly why I like Robinson Crusoe as well. It just feels like deep co-op, and I really like it. And it's been said by many reviewers before, but the On the Brink expansion is truly essential for Pandemic. It really adds a ton. It does add this weird traitory type thing where someone can play a bioterrorist trying to kill the world, and that doesn't really work. I mean, it works okay, but it's a very different game. But yeah, no, everything else about it works really well. Anyway, before I waffle on and say too many things that don't make sense, let's have a look at how the game plays. So here we have the game board. As you can see, it's a map of the world with various cities dotted about all over it and all connected with sort of red lines. And there's the infection deck at the top and the player deck at the bottom, which we'll go into in more detail. But at the side here, you can see we've got these petri dishes, which are filled with the black cube, or the cubes even, that are the diseases. And so you've got 24 of each colour cube, and the 4 diseases, the black you can see here, and then the blue, yellow and red, which will appear on the board, and they appear in their coloured locations. So each player gets a unique character, as you can see here. There's the Operation Expert, and we also have the Medic. And there's a whole bunch of characters you can see from these. Just a hand. More came in there On the Brink, and there's quite a lot of them. You can get quite a lot of variety here. And each character has their own unique powers or abilities that they can do. They have a one or two or maybe more of them. You just deal them out at random or by whatever method you choose. And then each player takes the pawn of their colour and everyone starts in Atlanta. And you also start with one of these research stations, little wooden houses. And there's a few more of them. So you can build them around the board to help ease of movement. You also need them to win the game, but again, I'll explain that in a bit. And players will be moving about in order to get to the disease cubes and remove them from the board. So you take actions to remove the disease cubes from the board. What we're really trying to do, though, is to get into this player deck here. And this deck has every city on the board in it. And what you need to do, so you need to sort of be gathering these each turn. You'll draw 2 of these cards at the end of your turn to fill your hand. You have a hand limit of 7 cards. And these cards have a few uses. You can spend them to fly across the board. So you have this, if you had the Manila card here, you could spend the card to fly to Manila, or if you were in Manila, you could spend the card to fly to anywhere on the board. But principally, though, you're going to be trying to gather these cards, because you need to gather these cards in order to cure the diseases. So you have to gather sets of these cards, sets of the colour, in order to cure the diseases. But that's not the only thing inside this deck. You also have these special event cards. And these are cards that have unique abilities that will help you in some ways. And there's a whole bunch of these cards. You can just see them come out. You just find them randomly in the deck. You'll have a certain number of them in the deck depending on how many players you have. And when you get them, you can play them at any time. They don't cost an action. They're just sort of little boosts that you will more than likely need to use at crucial times to save you from losing the game. So here we have the infection deck, and below it you can see the infection rate, and this track will go up as the epidemics are drawn, and that tells you how many cards you need to draw at the end of your turn. So at the end of your turn you'll draw cards from this deck, and this deck again, like the player deck, has every city on the board in it, and you draw cards from here and it will tell you to add cubes. So when you draw a card you add 1 cube to that city of that zone's colour. So at the end of everyone's turn you'll be drawing 2 or 3 or 4 cards. It can be quite nasty depending on what difficulty level you're playing on. But there's something else in the player deck, and that's these Epidemic Cards. When you're drawing cards to stock up your hand, you might come across one of these Epidemic Cards and you have to resolve it immediately. It increases the infection rate and puts more cubes on the board and makes things worse in ways that I'll explain in detail in a second. But there'll be a number of these Epidemic Cards in this deck, shuffled in sort of space. You have to space it out equally so you don't all come up at once. But yeah, there'll be a number depending on the difficulty you want to play on. In addition, On the Brink had these Virulent Strain Epidemic Cards, which are basically the same thing, but they have a unique ability on them. And when the first one's drawn, whichever disease on the board has the most cubes out is called the Virulent Strain, and there will be unique effects to that one colour. So that one colour will behave indifferently, or it'll get boosted or become harder to treat and things like that. So when one of these Epidemic Cards appears when you're taking player cards, you immediately increase the infection rate by 1. You then take the bottom card of the infection deck and you place 3 cubes in its location, in this case Moscow, so Moscow gets 3 black cubes. Then, and this is the really dangerous part, you then take the discard pile, you shuffle it up, and once it's shuffled it goes straight back on top of the draw deck. So that means that all the same locations are going to come out again that you've already infected before. Moscow particularly, so if Moscow comes out here, you see, then Moscow is immediately going to outbreak because it's already got 3 cubes in it. What does that mean? So as I've already said, you'll be adding cubes across the board in all the different cities that the players will have to then go and deal with. You do that at the end of everyone's turn. So every player has their own turn sequence, so you take your actions, then you draw your player cards, and then you do infections. So you're going to be doing a number of infections equal to the number of players every round. But if a city already has 3 cubes in it, like Moscow does here, it outbreaks, placing 1 cube in every adjacent location. This is really bad, particularly because it can cause a chain. So if an outbreaks into another outbreak, and it can just spread and spread and spread and spread and kill you really easily. Because every time an outbreak happens, you have to update this outbreak track. So every outbreak adds 1 to this track, and if the track gets all the way to the end, a nice skull and crossbones here, that equals death and you have lost the game. The world is beyond saving. The other way you can lose is simply if the game goes on too long. So if this player deck that you're drawing from to add to your hand, if that ever runs out, then you've run out of time to save the world and you've lost the game. The third way the game can end, yes, there's 3 ways the game can end with a loss, and that's, as you can see, there's a lot of black cubes out now. If you ever run out of cubes, you can see there's a finite number, there's 24 of each colour, then you lose the game. The disease has spread too rampant, it's uncontrollable, you can no longer cure it. There is unfortunately only one way to win the game, and that's to cure all 4 diseases. You see a little track at the bottom here. How you do that is when you're gathering the player cards, you need to gather 5 of the same colour, go to a research station and spend those 5 cards to discover the cure, and you then move the marker down to show that the disease is cured. That makes the disease slightly easier to treat when it's on the board, and once you've done all 4 of them, you win the game. The other thing you can do with this track is that if you have cured a disease and you manage to remove all of the cubes of that disease from the board, then you sunset the disease. So you flip the little token over to the sunset side. And that means that every time you draw cards from the infection deck to place more of that colour cube on the board, you don't place them. So you don't place the cubes on the board, you don't place the disease, which is really useful, but it's often not worth the time and effort to try and do that. And there's always other things you need to be doing, managing outbreaks or just gathering cards. So if the opportunity arises, certainly you do it, but it's sometimes not worth the effort. In this case, things are still a bit too easy for you. The On the Brink expansion came with a 5th disease, the purple mutated disease. Behaves slightly differently to the others. It doesn't appear naturally, as it were. There's no direct locations for it, but yeah, no, it's pretty cool. As adds a nice variable to the game. It has less cubes as well. It only has 12 cubes, so you have to try and manage that one a bit more carefully. But that's your lot for Pandemic. 3 ways to lose, only 1 way to win. The odds are not in your favour at first, but there's variable difficulty, and the expansion, as I say, adds a lot of variety to the play, so it's one I think you'd never get bored of. So that's Pandemic, one of my favourite games, one of my top 10 for sure. It can get quite complex, so gamers can really enjoy it, and it's easy enough to teach. So yeah, it works with all groups in my humble opinion. Thoroughly recommend giving this a try if you haven't played it before, especially if you haven't played co-op games before. It's a really good introduction. Give the On the Brink expansion a try. Maybe don't try the Bioterrorist, but everything else in there is really good. Thank you for watching. Check out my other board game reviews and my other talks and things, and soon I'll have a Pandemic Legacy review going up once I've played it. Find me on Twitter and Facebook, links in the description below. Check out all my other stuff, and thank you for watching. The end.